Captain Jake Morrison felt the cold metal of the command rail under his rough hands. His eyes were fixed on the main screen of the human warship, Terra's Edge. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers working. Then everything changed. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez spun around in her chair, her face pale with worry. Her fingers were still moving fast across the glowing buttons on her control panel. "Captain, I'm getting something." A distress call from deep space. Morrison's stomach dropped. Distress calls this far out in the outer rim usually meant one thing: pirates or slavers. Put it through. The speakers crackled to life, static mixed with broken words in the common galactic language that all spacefaring races used. But underneath the technical problems, Morrison could hear something that made his blood run cold. Screams. Real terror from real people. "Help us. Korath ships. They came from nowhere. Taking our children." The voice broke up, then came back stronger. "This is Captain Veltar of the Valen colony ship, Peaceful Dawn. We are under attack. Our shields are down. They're boarding us. Please, if anyone can hear this." The transmission ended with the sound of metal tearing apart. The bridge stayed silent for several long seconds. Morrison could see his crew processing what they had just heard. The Valen were known across the galaxy as peaceful farmers and scientists. They never hurt anyone. They just wanted to grow food and study stars. "Where are they?" Morrison asked, his voice steady, despite the anger building in his chest. Navigation Officer Tom Bradley was already working on his console. Numbers flashed across his screen as the ship's computer calculated distances and travel times. Sector 7G. "Captain, about 18 hours away, if we push the engines to maximum." Morrison nodded. 18 hours. In 18 hours, those Valen families would either be dead or chained up in Korath slave ships. The Korath were among the worst species in the galaxy. They captured peaceful races and sold them to work in mines and factories on distant worlds. The lucky ones died quickly. Around the bridge, Morrison noticed the alien crew members looking nervous. There was Zeph, the blue-skinned Zenthari, who served as their liaison with the Galactic Council. There was Dr. Krill, the insect-like Hextari, who ran their science department. Good people, all of them, but they came from species that followed rules above all else. Morrison was already moving toward his captain's chair. His decision was made before his boots hit the deck plates. "All ships, this is Morrison. Set course for those coordinates. Maximum burn. We leave in 5 minutes." The alien crew members looked shocked. Zeph stepped forward, his forearms gesturing in the way his people did when they were worried. "Sir, with respect, the Galactic Council has very clear rules about this kind of situation. Non-interference protocols state that we must contact the proper authorities and wait for the proper authorities are 18 hours away." Morrison cut him off. "Those people don't have 18 hours. Dr. Krill's translator made clicking sounds as she tried to speak. "Captain Morrison, I understand your concern for the Valen. But if we act without Council approval, there could be serious consequences for Earth's membership in the galactic community." Morrison turned to look at his alien crew members. These were good beings who had served alongside humans for years. They had become friends, even family. But they came from worlds where committees made decisions and paperwork was more important than action. Humans were different. Earth was what the galaxy called a death world, a planet so dangerous that just surviving childhood made every human into a natural warrior. Humans had evolved to make split-second decisions when death was breathing down their necks. They didn't have the luxury of long discussions when someone needed help. "Rodriguez," Morrison called to his communications officer, "signal the rest of our task force. Tell them we have a rescue mission." Amy Rodriguez smiled as she opened channels to the other human ships in their small fleet. Morrison could see her typing the message that would send 6 human warships racing toward a fight. They might not win. The alien crew members watched in amazement as the humans around them moved with sudden purpose. Tom Bradley was already calculating the fastest route through hyperspace. Chief Engineer Betty Walsh was pushing the engines beyond their normal limits. Weapons Officer Charlie Washington was running diagnostics on every gun and missile the ship carried. Morrison sat down in his command chair and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. In a few hours, they would drop out of hyperspace and face whatever the Korath had waiting for them. The smart move would be to call for backup, follow protocols, fill out the proper forms. But Morrison could still hear those screams in his head. Somewhere out there, families were being torn apart by creatures who saw other intelligent beings as nothing more than property to be bought and sold. The Galactic Council could file their complaints later. Right now, people needed help, and humans had never been good at walking away from that kind of call. The Terra's Edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Captain Morrison immediately knew they were too late to prevent the attack. But maybe, just maybe, they weren't too late to save lives. The main screen lit up with a sight that made every human on the bridge clench their fists in anger. 12 massive Korath warships hung in space like giant metal vultures around their prey. The Valen colony ship Peaceful Dawn was a broken mess, its hull torn open in several places, atmosphere and debris still streaming out into the cold vacuum of space. But the worst part wasn't the destroyed ship. The worst part was what Morrison could see happening around it. Small Korath shuttles moved back and forth between the wrecked colony ship and the larger vessels like busy ants. Through the tactical scanners, Morrison could see the heat signatures of hundreds, maybe thousands, of living beings packed into those shuttles. The Korath weren't just killing the Valen, they were taking them alive. Dr. Lisa Parker stood at her science station, her face pale as she read the scanner data. She was the fleet's expert on alien biology, which meant she knew exactly what those heat signatures represented. "Captain," she said quietly, "the sensors are showing massive life signs aboard those Korath ships. They've got cargo holds full of people." Commander Mike Davis moved to stand beside Morrison's chair. Mike had been Morrison's friend since their academy days, and the captain could read the mix of anger and concern on his face. Mike was the kind of officer who always thought 3 moves ahead, which made him perfect as a second in command. It also meant he understood exactly how bad their situation was. "Jake," Mike said quietly, so only Morrison could hear, "we've got 6 ships, they've got 12, and those aren't small patrol boats. Those are full-sized Korath battlecruisers. Each one of them outguns us individually." Morrison nodded, without taking his eyes off the screen. He could do math. 12 against 6 were terrible odds under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Those weren't just enemy ships out there, they were floating prisons full of innocent people. The smart play, Mike continued, would be to fall back, call for reinforcements. Maybe get a full battle group out here in a few days. Morrison's laugh was short and bitter. "Since when do we make the smart play, Mike?" Before his second-in-command could respond, the communications system crackled to life. The face that appeared on the main screen was the stuff of nightmares. The Korath were a species that looked like someone had crossed a wild boar with a shark and then given it intelligence and weapons. This particular Korath had scars running across his face, tusks that had been sharpened to points, and small black eyes that held no mercy at all. Human vessels. The Korath commander spoke in heavily accented Galactic Standard. "You will turn around and leave this system immediately. This is Korath hunting ground now. Stay, and you will be destroyed." Around the bridge, Morrison could see his crew's reactions. Some looked scared, which was smart, because the Korath had a reputation for good reason. Others looked angry, which was also smart, because anger could be a powerful motivator in a fight. But Morrison felt something else entirely. He felt the cold, focused calm that came over him whenever someone threatened innocent people in his presence. It was the same feeling he'd had as a young Marine when pirates attacked civilian ships. It was the feeling that had gotten him promoted through the ranks of Earth's military faster than almost anyone in history. Morrison stood up from his captain's chair and walked toward the main screen. When he spoke, his voice was broadcast not just to the Korath commander, but on all frequencies that anyone in the system might be monitoring. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. You have exactly 60 seconds to release your prisoners and surrender your vessels. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. This is your only warning." The Korath commander's face twisted into what might have been a smile if it wasn't so terrifying. "You think 6 small human ships can challenge the might of a Korath hunting pack? We have taken thousands of worlds. We have enslaved entire species. What makes you think?" Morrison cut the transmission with a gesture. He turned to face his weapons officer, Lieutenant Charlie Washington. Charlie was a veteran who had served on the frontier for 15 years. He had fought pirates, raiders, and worse things than most people could imagine. When Charlie smiled, the way he was smiling now, it usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Charlie," Morrison said calmly, "power up everything we've got." Charlie's grin got wider as his fingers danced across his control panel. All across the terrace edge, weapon systems that had been hidden from casual scans began to come online. "With pleasure, sir." The bridge crew watched their displays as similar energy signatures appeared around the other 5 human ships in their task force. What the Korath had taken for simple exploration, vessels were revealing their true nature. Morrison walked back to his command chair and sat down. 60 seconds was almost up, and he could already see the Korath ships beginning to move into attack formation. Time to show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened innocence in front of humans. The 60 seconds were up, and the Korath commander was still laughing when everything changed. Across the human fleet, panels that had looked like normal hull plating suddenly slid away to reveal rows of weapon ports. Energy readings that had seemed like simple life support systems spiked as massive reactors came online. The 6 human ships, which moments before had looked like peaceful exploration vessels, transformed before everyone's eyes into something entirely different. "Captain." Morrison sat perfectly still in his command chair, watching the tactical display as his ships revealed their true nature. Earth had learned long ago that the galaxy was not always a friendly place. Every human vessel that left home carried enough firepower to level a small moon, hidden beneath hulls designed to look harmless. All ships, Morrison's voice carried across the communication channels to every human vessel in the fleet, weapons free. Show them what happens when you threaten innocence in human space. The Korath commander's laughter died in his throat as he watched his sensors scream warnings at him. The small human ships were suddenly showing energy signatures that rivaled full battle fleets. But by then, it was already too late. Lieutenant Charlie Washington pressed a single button on his weapons console. Fire. The Terra's Edge shuddered as its main railgun discharged. A slug of depleted uranium the size of a small car accelerated to nearly 20% of light speed in the space of 3 seconds. The projectile crossed the distance between the human ship and its target so fast that the Korath didn't even have time to register what was happening. The lead Korath vessel simply disappeared. One moment it was a massive warship bristling with weapons and armor. The next moment it was an expanding cloud of superheated gas and metal fragments. The kinetic energy released when the railgun slug hit was equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. But that was just the beginning. Across the human fleet, weapons that no one in the galaxy knew existed opened fire simultaneously. Plasma torpedoes that burned at temperatures hotter than a star's core streaked through space, turning Korath shields into glowing mist before melting through their hulls like a hot knife through butter. The second Korath ship tried to turn and run, but a spread of guided missiles from the human destroyer Vengeful Angel caught it. Amid the explosions tore the vessel in half, sending both pieces spinning away into the darkness. On the bridge of the terrace edge, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez watched her tactical display with wide eyes as red dots, representing enemy ships, disappeared one after another. "Captain, the third Korath vessel is trying to surrender." Morrison's voice was cold as space itself. "Tell them surrender was offered 60 seconds ago. They chose to fight instead." Another railgun discharge lit up the darkness. The surrendering Korath ship joined its companions as debris. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over in 3 minutes and 47 seconds, where moments before there had been 12 massive Korath warships. Now there was nothing but wreckage and fading energy signatures. Dr. Lisa Parker stood at her science station, staring at the scanner readings with something like shock on her face. "The sensors aren't picking up any life signs from the Korath ships. They're all ... they're all gone." Lieutenant Rodriguez turned from her communications panel, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jesus Christ. We actually did it. 12 ships. We took out 12 ships and we didn't lose anybody." But Captain Morrison was already moving, his mind shifting from the completed battle to the rescue operation that had to happen now. Every second they delayed meant more Valen prisoners might die from their injuries. "Mike," he called to his second in command, "get rescue teams to that colony ship immediately. I want every shuttle we have in the air in 5 minutes." Commander Davis was already coordinating with the other ships in the fleet. "On it, Jake. The medical teams are prepping for massive casualties." Morrison turned to Dr. Parker. "Lisa, I need you to coordinate with the medical staff. The Valen have a different biology than us. Make sure our doctors know how to treat them properly." "Already on it, Captain," Parker replied, her scientific mind focusing on the task ahead despite the shock of what had just happened. "And someone, get me a damage report on our own ships," Morrison added. The answer came back within minutes, and it was almost unbelievable. The human task force had engaged 12 enemy warships and emerged completely unscathed. 0 casualties, 0 significant damage. The Korath fleet was simply gone, erased from existence by weapons technology that the galaxy had never suspected humans possessed. Lieutenant Washington looked up from his weapons console with a satisfied expression. "All weapon systems show green across the board, Captain. We're ready for round 2, if anyone else wants to try their luck." But Morrison was already focused on the broken Valen colony ship floating ahead of them. Through the viewports, he could see the first human rescue shuttles launching, racing toward the damaged vessel to search for survivors. The fight was over. Now came the part that really mattered, saving lives. On bridges across the galaxy, other species who had been monitoring the distress calls watched the sensor recordings with growing amazement. The humans had just rewritten everything the galaxy thought it knew about Earth's military capabilities. But more importantly, they had sent a message that would echo across every star system. When innocents called for help, humans answered, and heaven help anyone who tried to stop them. The first human rescue shuttle docked with the broken Valen colony ship just 8 minutes after the last Korath vessel had been destroyed. What the survivors saw when the airlock opened confused them more than the battle they had just witnessed. The same humans who had just erased 12 warships from existence were now moving through the damaged corridors with medical supplies and emergency equipment. These weren't the cold, calculating warriors the Valen expected to see. These were people who looked genuinely heartbroken at the suffering around them, Captain. Morrison stepped through the airlock, wearing an emergency breathing mask, his eyes immediately scanning the corridor for survivors. The walls were scorched from weapon fire, and the air still smelled of burned metal and fear, but he could hear voices weak, frightened, but alive. "Over here," called Chief Medical Officer Dr. Lisa Parker from deeper in the ship. "I've got survivors in the family quarters." Morrison made his way through the twisted metal and debris, following the sound of Parker's voice. What he found made his stomach turn. Valen families huddled together in corners, many of them injured, all of them terrified. The Korath had been preparing to load them onto their slave ships when the human fleet arrived. A small Valen child, no more than 6 years old by human standards, lay unconscious near a collapsed wall beam. Purple blood, the Valen equivalent of human red, stained her torn clothing. Morrison didn't hesitate. He carefully lifted the child in his arms and started back toward the shuttle. The child's weight felt almost nothing to Morrison's enhanced muscles. All humans were stronger than most galactic species, due to Earth's high gravity, but he moved as gently as if he were carrying his own daughter. Behind him, other human rescue workers were helping injured Valen adults, offering water, medical supplies, and most importantly, hope. Captain Veltar, the elderly Valen who commanded the colony ship, watched all of this with growing amazement. The same species that had just demonstrated the most efficient military destruction he had ever witnessed was now showing more compassion than he had seen from the so-called civilized races of the Galactic Council. When Morrison returned from carrying the injured child to Dr. Parker's medical station, Veltar approached him with tears running down his weathered face. The old Valen's voice shook as he spoke. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Your people, they just destroyed an entire Korath battle group. Weapons like that, ships like yours, you could conquer half the galaxy if you wanted to. Why are you here helping us? Why would you risk everything for complete strangers?" Morrison paused in the medical bay doorway, looking back at the controlled chaos of humans working to save alien lives. Dr. Parker was operating on 3 patients at once, with the help of her medical team. Lieutenant Rodriguez was comforting a group of frightened Valen children in their own language. She had learned it during her xenolinguistics training. Commander Davis was coordinating the evacuation of the most seriously wounded to the better equipped human medical facilities. "Because it's the right thing to do," Morrison said simply. Veltar stared at him. "That's it? That's your only reason?" Morrison turned to face the old Valen captain directly. "What other reason do we need? You were in trouble. We heard your call for help. We came. But the risks," Veltar protested. "Your people could have been killed. Your ships could have been destroyed. Your government will probably face consequences from the Galactic Council for this action." Morrison shrugged. "Maybe, but your people would have been enslaved or killed if we hadn't acted. We can deal with political consequences later. We couldn't live with ourselves if we had just ignored your distress call." As word of the rescue operation spread through the surviving Valen, something amazing happened. Despite everything they had been through, despite their injuries and their trauma, they began to smile. Children who had been crying in terror began to laugh as human medical technicians made funny faces to distract them during treatment. Adults who had given up hope began to believe they might actually see their homeworld again. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the news of what had happened was spreading at light speed through the communication networks. On the core world's alien, governments were receiving reports that seemed impossible to believe. In the crystal spires of the Xanthari homeworld, analysts stared at sensor readings showing the complete destruction of a Korath battle group by a small human task force. The weapons signatures didn't match anything in their databases. The humans had been hiding military technology that rivaled the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. On the arthropod worlds of the Hextari Confederation, military strategists recalculated every assessment they had ever made about human capabilities. If 6 human ships could destroy 12 Korath vessels without taking a single casualty, what could a full human battle fleet accomplish? In the ancient halls of the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime, emergency sessions were being called for the first time in decades. Representatives from hundreds of species demanded answers about the primitive humans who had just demonstrated that they possessed some of the most advanced weapons in known space. But the most important revelation wasn't about human military strength. It was about human character. Species across the galaxy watched the rescue footage with growing amazement. Here was a race that could annihilate enemies without mercy. then immediately risk everything to save the innocent. They had the power to conquer, but they chose to protect instead. The Valen survivors would spend the rest of their lives telling the story of the day. Humans answered their call for help, and everyone who heard that story would understand something new about these strange beings from the third planet of an unremarkable star. Humans didn't fight for conquest or glory. They fought for something much more dangerous to the established order. They fought because they believed it was right. 3 weeks after the Korath battle, Earth's ambassador Maria Santos walked into the Galactic Council chambers, knowing that the next few hours would determine humanity's future among the stars. The massive hall buzzed with tension as representatives from hundreds of different species whispered among themselves, their various languages, creating a strange symphony of worry and anger. Santos was a veteran diplomat who had served Earth for over 20 years, but she had never faced a challenge like this. The formal charges against humanity filled a document that was nearly 1,000 pages long. Violations of non-interference protocols, unauthorized military action, destruction of property. The list went on and on. The council chamber itself was designed to intimidate. Curved walls rose hundreds of feet overhead, with viewing galleries for each member species arranged in perfect circles that seemed to stretch forever. At the center, a single podium waited for speakers, surrounded by holographic projectors that could display evidence for all to see. As Santos took her place at the speaker's podium, she could feel the weight of thousands of alien eyes upon her. In the front row sat the most powerful species in the galaxy, the ancient Xanthari, with their blue skin and 4 arms. The insect-like Hextari, who controlled the richest trade routes. The crystalline Vorthok, whose technology was legendary throughout known space. The Xanthari Prime representative stood first, his 4 arms gesturing in the formal patterns his people used for important speeches. The human species stands accused of 17 separate violations of galactic law. They attacked Korath vessels without provocation. They ignored council protocols. They have demonstrated weapons technology that was never declared to this body as required by treaty. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Santos waited patiently as speaker after speaker rose to condemn humanity's actions. The Hextari representative clicked angrily about the violation of trade agreements. The Vorthok delegate spoke, in crystalline tones, about the danger of undeclared military assets. Others simply demanded that humans be expelled from the council entirely. When the accusations finally ended, Santos stood and looked out at the sea of alien faces. Many looked angry. Some looked frightened. A few looked curious about what she might say in humanity's defense. "You want to talk about aggression?" Santos asked, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber without any artificial amplification. "Let me show you what real aggression looks like." The holographic projectors came to life, filling the air above the chamber with 3-dimensional images that made many of the assembled delegates gasp in horror. The first images showed the Valen colony ship as it had looked when the human fleet arrived, broken, burning, with atmosphere streaming out through massive holes torn in its hull. But the worst images came next. Security footage from inside the ship showed Korath soldiers dragging screaming Valen families from their homes. Children were ripped away from their parents. Elderly Valen, who couldn't move fast enough, were beaten unconscious. The footage showed cargo holds being loaded with hundreds of prisoners destined for slave markets across the galaxy. "This," Santos said quietly, "is aggression. This is what the Korath have been doing for decades, while this council debates and forms committees and files reports." The images changed to show the aftermath. Human rescue teams working frantically to save lives. The assembled delegates watched Captain Morrison carrying wounded Valen children to safety. They saw Dr. Parker operating on alien patients with tears in her eyes. They witnessed human soldiers who had just destroyed an entire enemy fleet, now sharing their own food rations with rescued prisoners. "For too long," Santos continued, This council has treated diplomacy as more important than lives. You've called endless meetings while innocents died. You've written treaties while families were torn apart. You've filed paperwork while children were sold into slavery. You call this diplomacy. We call it cowardice. The Xanthari representative jumped to his feet, his forearms waving in outrage. The humans violated 17 separate treaties. They acted without authorization. They saved 3,000 lives, Santos interrupted, her voice cutting through his protests like a blade. 3,000 innocent beings who would have spent the rest of their lives in chains if we had waited for your committees to meet and your bureaucrats to file the proper forms. She gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed footage of the rescued Valen families reuniting on human ships. If your treaties value paperwork over people, if your laws place procedure above preventing genocide, then your treaties and your laws are wrong. What happened next surprised everyone in the chamber. Captain Veltar, the elderly Valen commander whose ship had been rescued, stood up in the visitors' gallery. He had been invited to testify, but no one expected him to speak at this moment. Was there, he said in accented but clear Galactic standard. I watched my grandchildren being loaded into Korath slave ships. I heard my daughter screaming as they dragged her away, and I watched humans risk their lives to save people they had never met before. Veltar's voice grew stronger as he continued. This council has known about Korath slave raids for 50 years. 50 years of meetings and discussions and diplomatic protests. In 50 years, you saved exactly 0 Valen lives. The humans saved us all in less than 4 hours. Other voices began to join his. Representatives from species that had suffered under Korath raids started standing up throughout the chamber. The Dalari delegates spoke about lost colonies. The Yixan representative talked about children who had disappeared. One by one they voiced their support for humanity's actions. When the final vote was called, the motion to censure humanity failed by a margin of 3-1. But more importantly, something new was born in that chamber that day. Species after species rose to pledge support for what the media would later call the Terran Doctrine. The principle that saving innocent lives took priority over political convenience. The immediate effects were dramatic. Within days, the Korath Empire announced they were releasing all slaves and offering full reparations to their victims. Other predatory species that had operated under the Council's protection suddenly found themselves facing the possibility of human intervention, but the long-term effects were even more significant. The galaxy had learned something important about the species from Earth. Humans didn't fight for conquest, or resources, or glory. They fought because they believed it was the right thing to do. And that, as every tyrant and slaver in the galaxy would soon discover, made them more dangerous than any weapon they could ever build. The age of human expansion had begun, but it would be an expansion built on protection rather than conquest. When Deathworlders heard a cry for help, they answered, and heaven help anyone who tried to stop them.